Okay, welcome back to another edition of the Dirty Verdict podcast. I'm one of your hosts, mediator Peter Taaffe, here with, as always, with full-time litigator, trial lawyer Kyle Herbert, and full-time litigator, trial lawyer Bill Ogden. Sitting in with us is our public relations director and co-producer, Amanda Orr. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah.
Say thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
We have a very special guest, very unique guest today, and it's Kathryn Casey. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Oh, well, thank you for asking.
We've done over 100 episodes of this podcast. We typically talk, with lawyers, mostly in the civil side, because that's all of our backgrounds, but definitely many criminal lawyers, prosecutors, defense lawyers, daily lawyers, probate lawyers. We've gotten to where we've been very interested in the true crime genre, and have had on criminal defense lawyers that kind of help us discuss that and kind of help us understand it and help our audience understand some of these cases. And so you obviously are a natural fit for that kind of trend we've got, because you are one of the most accomplished true crime writers and now also fictional writers. So thank you very much for joining us.
Well, as I said, I'm happy to be here. True crime is really hot right now. It's an amazing field to be in.
Yes. So last week we talked with Anthony Oso, who's with the Dan Cogdell law firm. We really broke down the David Temple case, and I know I understand you wrote a book on that case. Is that right?
I did. I wrote a book called Shattered on the David Temple case.
Excellent. Well, that was fascinating. And then as I was preparing for this interview, several of your true crime books were very interesting cases. You've written several. I know you've written several fictional books, but if it's okay with you, I was hoping we could focus on like 3 cases that I think would be particularly interesting: the Texas lawyers and Texas bands of law. That's all right with you?
Well, sure. I can't really talk right now about the. Did you say the one about the lawyers? Is this the Kaufman County?
No. There's going to be three books that you've already published, but they're stories that I think are really interesting for lawyers that maybe could be helpful to kind of understand the process and take advantage of the extensive work and research you did on those 3 cases. And I'm going to tell you, they are the Celeste Beard, the Waco pastor. The last name is Baker, and the other one will be the stiletto case. Okay, so the first one, so the Celeste Beard case, there hits home for me because I live half the time in Austin and live very near Austin Country Club and by the home that this happened. So that case with Celeste Beard, that was a young lady who married an older, wealthy man. Is that right?
It is. Celeste was a waitress at the Austin Country Club, and Steve Beard was not one of the owners, one of the founders of what's now the CBS TV affiliate in Austin. Steve had been married for 40-some years. His wife died, and he struck up a relationship with Celeste.
And Celeste had been, I think she was originally from like California, and she kind of bounced around, maybe Washington State before finding some footing in Austin.
Celeste is an amazing character. Celeste, by that time, I think was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, and she had already been married 3 times, divorced 3 times, and she had financially cleaned out every husband. She never left any money behind when she walked out the door. So that was a little bit of a problem with Steve because he had a lot of money and it was in a trust.
Yeah. So Steve, as I understand it, he had a longtime first wife who had passed away, I believe, from cancer, and then he had older children from that family. And then, yes, he had created a bunch of family trusts with his investments to kind of protect them. Is that right?
And he had 3 children from the first marriage, were all grown. He had grandchildren. He was in his late 60s, early 70s when all of this happened. And Celeste had twin daughters who were teenagers at the time. They ended up getting married. He built her a beautiful home not too far from Michael Dell's house up in the hills over Austin. Gave her a wonderful life, bought her jewelry, and they, went on fabulous trips. But from the beginning, the marriage was troubled. One of the first things that happened is that Celeste went into the safety deposit box at the bank and cleaned it out of all of his ex-wife's jewelry, or his late wife's jewelry. So there were early on signs that Celeste was there, perhaps not just out of love.
And she, even after they were married, I understand she had some issues. I don't know if it was a chemical or drug dependency, or I know she went to a psychiatric hospital. Is that?
Celeste had a habit when things weren't going well with the whatever husband she was with of threatening to commit suicide, and often accusing that husband of in some way physically harming her. So at the time all of this really started to heat up, she and Steve had been married for a while, and then he was on the verge of asking for a divorce, and she knew that. And by the prenup, she wouldn't walk away with anything but her personal possessions. So she took a gun and threatened to commit suicide. An ambulance was called, and she was taken down to St. David's to the psychiatric unit in Austin.
And there she met another, I guess, patient in that facility named Tracy Charlton. Is that right?
She did. She quickly struck up a friendship that turned into a relationship with Tracy Charlton. Tracy was the manager of Book People, the biggest independent bookstore in Austin. And she was a gay woman, and very bright, very funny, very troubled. She had a very difficult life, and she and Celeste bonded quickly and before long became lovers.
So, and I watched it. There's a very good, for the audience, there's a very good 2020 ABC News special that Kathryn's interviewed extensively in. Very long, covers this. My understanding from watching that is that at least Celeste denied any actual romantic interest, at least her towards Tracy. But Tracy, I understand, she'd said differently. Is that right?
Yes, Celeste, as things unraveled, Celeste convinced Tracy that she was abusive toward her. And that summer, they spent quite a bit of time with Celeste kind of coaching Tracy, and they were both trying to kill Steve. So there were multiple instances where they drugged Steve. Well, when Celeste would drug Steve, and then she called Tracy up to come over, and then they'd back out and call 911. And this went on for quite a while. But Celeste did later on deny that she had a physical relationship with Tracy, but Tracy and Celeste were seen in bed together without any clothes on. They were kissing at a party that Celeste threw. They were acting like a couple, presenting as a couple to other people. So it was a bit of even though she denied it, the common sense was that they were having this relationship.
And so take us, I think it was in October of 1999, Steve is sleeping by himself in the marital bed, and an intruder comes in the house and shoots him, I believe, like in the stomach or in his abdomen. Is that right?
And shot him in the abdomen. He woke up. Celeste was not in the room. She often wasn't at night, and he woke up and called 911 and begged them for help and said that his guts were spilling out of his abdomen. His abdomen had been torn open by the shot. The EMTs arrived. Celeste came running out. saying, oh my gosh, what happened to my husband? Save my husband. It was, and Christina was there that day, one of the twins. They were the only three in the house.
And so, this is not a classic murder where he's shot and dies, within, seconds. So he actually ended up living for quite a bit of time in the hospital. Is that?
He did. He didn't die until the following January. He was actually released in January and went home and was home for a few days. When Celeste brought him back to the hospital, at that point, he became septic and died.
And at some point, I guess in that period, the law enforcement started looking at Tracy Charlton as a possible suspect.
That happened very quickly. The first night, the twins and their friends told the officers that showed up at the hospital, they suggested that they talk to Tracy Charlton because of the relationship that Celeste had had with Tracy and the fact that Celeste had come up to one of the girls and said, whatever you do, don't mention Tracy's name.
So the police, I understand, they go to Tracy's house, ask her if she has a shotgun, and she leads them into the closet where the guest there is her shotgun.
He does. She reaches in, her name's on the shotgun, and she pulls it down. It's just been cleaned. They could smell the cleaning fluid.
Did Tracy ultimately admit to shooting Steve?
She didn't for months. She was in the jail in Austin for quite after Steve died. The charge was up to murder, and she was in the jail in Austin for quite a while. And she kept insisting that no, she wouldn't talk to them. She told her attorney what had happened, but told the attorney that she would not turn on Celeste. And then she saw in the paper that Celeste had gotten married again. And she started thinking maybe the relationship wasn't what she thought it was with Celeste. So at that point, she called her attorney and said she wanted to talk, and they worked a deal.
And so, yeah, that's kind of like the David Temple case where that happened actually about this same time frame, 99, I think. But he was not charged for several years. So in this case, what was the time frame between the incident and then when Celeste Beard was actually charged with involvement in this?
I think it was, I'm not positive, but I think it was a couple of years. It took a little while. She got married and moved up to South Lake in Dallas and was living and spending Steve's money and enjoying herself when Tracy decided to finally talk and they came and arrested her. They also wanted to make sure that they had other testimony. So Celeste's children, the twins, agreed to testify, and some of their friends who had seen things that summer.
And so the twins, he had adopted them, but at this point, they were estranged or from their mother?
From their mother that they had. Celeste had been really dominating with the girls for a long time, and I think it was a really difficult thing for the girls to finally eventually get up on the stand and testify against their mother. But they believed that she had killed Steve, and they had seen things that indicated that was true.
So the trial starts in Judge Julie Kassur's courtroom. And from the 2020 piece, there's a lot of excerpts, video excerpts from the trial where Celeste's lawyer was Dick Aaron. Most people. So was that entire trial filmed and for publication like court TV or just for posterity, or how are we able to see so much video from that trial?
That trial was pretty amazing. Nancy Grace had a tent set up outside the courthouse. The courtroom was filled with reporters from all over the world. And yes, they had a camera that went, and it was going out live on court TV.
Very good. So the technical charge against Celeste, was it murder or conspiracy to commit murder or some other charge?
It was a murder charge, and she was also charged with injury to the elderly. And she had tried to get a hitman to kill someone who was a potential witness against her, a woman named Donna Goodson. And so there was also another pending charge to, conspiracy to commit murder, attempt to commit murder.
What's the nature of Mr. Vigeran's defense? What does he try to convince the jury really happened here?
Well, the main thing was that this was all part of Tracy's delusional mind, including the affair with Celeste. If he could prove that they were never really together, that this was just Tracy, Tracy's delusions, then all that Tracy had to say became really questionable, of course. So that was the biggest thing. He at times would point to other potential suspects. He suggested that perhaps the twins had as much of a motive to kill Tracy as anyone. So, but mainly it was to say that Tracy had acted alone and that Celeste had nothing to do with her husband's murder.
Then did he go after the twins? Because they had given testimony adverse to their mother and his clients. How did he go after the twins?
He did. He did. He pointed at the twins as potentially being involved. And but the main focus was Tracy, that Tracy was delusional and that she was a predatory woman and she was jealous of Steve because she had this delusional relationship with Celeste.
Got it. And so ultimately, Celeste was convicted and sentenced to how long in prison?
I think she has true life sentences.
Okay, and like eligible for parole, and maybe she's 80. Is she still living?
I think she's eligible in her 70s. I'm not. I'd have to go look, but I seem to remember in her mid 70s.
But she's still in prison.
She is still in prison.
And then Tracy, interestingly, she got out, even though she admittedly was the person that pulled the trigger. She got out within a relatively reasonable amount of time.
Now, she got a 20-year sentence and got out in 8. I think the feeling that was that among the prosecutors and everyone involved, that she had been manipulated by Celeste. There were a lot of writings between the two women when they were in the psychiatric unit together that backed up much of what Tracy said about the relationship, and greeting cards that that Celeste had sent to her and everything. So she did. She got out after 8 years. I think that was her first parole day.
So to do your research on this one, and this will kind of all of them, what did you do to prepare and research to give yourself so much material to write this on this very interesting case?
Well, the first thing I always do is I always reach out to the lawyers. I let everybody know I'm going to be there. And I ask them to let the families know that I'll be there because I don't really want to walk in and surprise anybody. The idea that there's a book being written about a case can make people a little bit nervous. So I always tell everybody first. And then I went to the trial. I think in this case, it was 6 or 7 weeks. Dick's trials tend to be pretty long. The Temple case, too, was long. I think that was about a 6-week trial. And I sit through and I take notes and cover the case, and I meet people. And I introduce myself and ask them if, when this is over, if they would be willing to sit down and talk with me. And that's what I do one at a time afterward. I think in the Beard case, I probably talked to somewhere around 80 people afterwards. I interviewed everybody on all sides. On that case, I even tracked down Steve's dry cleaner that he'd been going to for years, who had an interesting story about him, and the guy who ran the restaurant where we used to go and have lunch every day. I mean, you want to bring people alive in a book. You want people to identify with people. So little quirky things like I hear this guy's a multi-millionaire, but you wouldn't spend more than $5 on lunch every day, or just kind of cute little stories that bring people, make people feel like they really know a person. So I do a lot of research, and then I sit down and organize all of it and write a book. So
Awesome. Okay. I was going to ask, do you ever feel like you were in danger when you were doing these research? I know you go out to crime scenes and you interview a lot of people. Did you ever get any pushback or feel like you were in danger?
we've had unfortunate occurrences throughout the last 30 years, I guess it's been now. I started writing the books. Well, I was doing true crime for magazines in the very beginning. And that was actually even harder because I was going from one case to the next all the time. And I have been threatened off and on over the years, but very rarely, and not to the point where I really felt I was in danger. People can become emotional. I mean, on both sides. You have hurt people on both sides of these cases. The victim's family, of course, and they've of course suffered the most, especially in a murder case, because they've completely lost the victim. On the other side, quite often you'll have, the person who's on trial and their family. And like in the Temple case, the Temple family was very, very nervous and concerned, understandably so, throughout the trial. And it can be quite uncomfortable. I'm trying to know these people, to really find out why this happened, what happened, and why it happened. Why is a big question with true crime. And so there have been instances where it's been a little uncomfortable, where I've been a little worried about my safety.
Well, I don't remember the first case you and I met on. I think it was either David Temple or the stiletto case. I know it wasn't Leon Jacob, but I don't remember which came first, stiletto or David Temple. But I would love to talk about the stiletto trial, because that was such a bizarre trial, partly because it really was theatrical with John Jordan, demonstrating how she murdered for stiletto. And at that point, she at some point said they were Christian Louboutin heels, and it ended up that they were like worth less than $100. They weren't, the brand name that she was saying they were.
Yeah.
So I was saying that I think the first trial we met on was either David Temple or the stiletto.
I think it was the stiletto case, yeah.
Yeah.
And we went through the David Temple retrial together. I think that's how it worked.
Yeah, and then Leon Jacob was last.
Well, why don't I jump in? This is Kyle. Let me ask maybe a question or two about the case that you guys are calling the stiletto case.
Right.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Okay. My ears are not that great either, so I'm going to be as loud as possible.
I'll have to gaze back down.
Thank you from an 11 down to a 9. So the information I read about this case, it seems like the murderer, is there anything more to the story than that she was very emotionally unstable and a really rotten drunk?
Well, it's really an interesting story because Anna had lived a really pretty normal suburban life up until a couple of years before all of this happened, before the murder. And something must have snapped in her, and she'd been working for Coca-Cola. She was like a sales rep for Coke. And she decided to become a massage therapist, and she opened an office in downtown Houston. And at the same time, all of this was going on. Yes, she was circulating to the bars downtown. She should become quite she was one of those people who was closing up the bars at night. But she also got really interested in the occult. And she thought that she had powers. And she was doing very unusual things. For a while, she lived in a Rice Hotel. which a lot of people, or some people, seem to think may be haunted. And she is playing a Ouija board at night. The day of the morning of the killing, when they were processing Stefan Anderson's apartment, and they went inside their purse, they pulled out a card book, and it was open to the death card. So there was this whole other thing, this kind of strange transition that Anna had gone through over a period of just a few years.
I was interested by all of the witnesses that they brought in who said that she had these strange, random fits of violence, right? The guy that she hit in the back of the head with the candlestick, and some other people that had seen her wild and erratic behavior. And I didn't pick up on any of the occult stuff. Did that make it into the trial, or was that kind of stuff that people discerned afterwards?
No, some of it kind of made into the trial, like when the Cranston guy got up and said, yeah, I pulled this tarot card book out of her purse and that it was open to the death card. And then in the punishment phase, one of the witnesses got on the stand and said that she was afraid of Anna. And when Mr. Carroll asked her why, she described having dreams and saying that Anna was haunting her sleep and everything. I mean, it was kind of there, but it wasn't like really gone into. So, but it was definitely part of her life for the last couple of years, 2-3 years of her life.
You live in this world much more so than we do, but it was very chilling to watch Anna give like a 4-hour interview while she's just completely covered from chin to toe in dried blood. It's a very chilling thing to watch.
Well, the crime scene photos in that case were horrific. They were truly terrible. And you're right, she was covered in blood, all her clothes, and she agreed to talk. This is kind of a defense attorney's nightmare in a criminal case, because I mean, she went in there, I think they talked to her for about an hour and a half. And then only Mirandized her when they started talking about Stefan and the murder. Up until that time, she was talking about her other relationships with men. And, but you're right, it ended up being a 3 or a 4-hour interview.
I don't know what would be more damning for her defense, the fact that she gave 3 hours of uninterrupted testimony to the police, or the fact that she stabbed the defendant 30 times with her IQ.
Yeah, they knew at least, I think it was 25 times, but she was coming down so hard and so often that they think it may have been many more than that, and she was just landing in kind of the same area. But poor Stefan, she didn't break a bone. The skull is pretty thick, and she didn't break a bone, but she actually exposed parts of his skull. There was blood all over the walls, blood splatter. The forensics were really big in this case. The blood splatter testimony was really interesting.
I almost bought or rented a condo in the Park Lane about 3 years after this after this murder occurred. I'm kind of glad I didn't. It's a kind of a spooky building. It has these really long kind of circular walls and hallways. But yeah, the whole vibe is pretty strange.
You mentioned the crime scene photos being horrific, and of all the murder trials that I covered, that was Stefan's pictures were definitely the worst. I mean, they stuck at me. I remember every night after trial, and I would go to bed and I would close my eyes and I saw his face. It was really, really brutal.
Or you saw the autopsy photos?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we needed to see the autopsy photos, for the jury to get full and not.
I thought it was really interesting that the jury convicted her in what, like 100 minutes, 90 minutes, something like that.
Nah, it was just a couple of hours. But I think at that point they sat through the entire full, 3-4 hours, whatever it was of the interview, and she got up on the stand and testified, and that was really a disjointed, bizarre experience to watch. So I think they were just all in agreement and ready to move on at that point.
There's a great video of her defense lawyer where he explains, I told her not to take the stand. She made a decision to take the stand. And then I practiced with her for days and days and days. And I would tell her how to attack an answer. And she would completely ignore me as though she couldn't understand the words that I was saying.
Yeah, it's interesting, but a lot of the people I've written about over the years, the people who have committed these crimes, often have the impression that they're extremely intelligent and they can talk their way out of anything. And Anna's one of those people. I think she got on that stand and really thought she could charm the jurors and talk her way out of it. But there was a lot of evidence, and there was, Jack Carroll was the defense attorney, and I think he did a good job with everything he had, but they were kind of framing it as a traditional, or what's usually thought of as a domestic violence case where the man is the violent aggressor. Yeah. And the problem was that there wasn't a single aggressive wound on Stefan. They were all defense wounds. And he was like this. So there were wounds through here and on his head. And they couldn't find a single person who got up on the stand and said that he'd ever lost his temper and become violent with anyone. So
I guess the witness, the cab driver right before, said that she was the aggressor in the cab, that she was out of control.
Yeah, she had been in a fight with another woman just like a week or so before all of this happened, and still had bruises from that fight when this happened with Stefan. He was trying to get her out of his life. He had, I think initially he'd been in love with her. She's beautiful and she's fun and she was young, and I think he was really in love with her in the beginning, and then things started happening and he realized that this wasn't anybody he wanted to be around. He showed up once with a black eye at a restaurant that he frequented, and then he was in another restaurant and she attacked him. And she actually bit him, I think, in the cheek and drew blood. So there were people who had seen her attack him before.
All right, so Alan, do you want to turn, if you're all right with it, turn to another book of yours called Deadly Little Secrets, The Minister, His Mistress, and a Heartless Texas Murder. And Bill Ogden, one of our hosts, is going to kind of drive the discussion here.
Yeah, I thought you could line them up a little bit and talk about the murder of Kari Baker. So
yeah, it's a really sad, they're all sad, but Kari's case was really sad. Yeah.
tell me what I wanted to ask you about first, which was what made her drooling and cunning, going out searching and then picking a case. Some of the stories that written. What goes into you evaluating whether it's something that you do in L1 tribe?
Well, I look for a case that's kind of almost like a mystery story with a lot of twists and turns. So somebody just losing their temper with someone, while as tragic as that is, that's not usually enough for a book. I need to have a relationship between the people and things that are kind of leading up to it and unfolding over a period of time. So the Baker case was kind of a perfect one for that. It was, of course, really sad. Kari was a wonderful young woman, a beautiful young mother. They had two darling little daughters. And she was married to somebody she thought was very different than who he really was. She was married to a Baptist minister. But, there's that thing in the Bible about wolves in sheep's clothing. So that play out. Yes.
That would be the story a little bit. I realized some Baptist preacher or minister was having an affair with.
It was with the music minister's daughter. Doesn't that seem like a cliche, huh?
Right. Well, the interesting fact, how much new information, because this is one of those cases that I think is probably rare, maybe not if you do, but you actually got to interview the defendant's Elizabeth Baker after he's convicted while he's in prison. Is that common?
No, I usually do. I always ask to interview them. David Temple, I think, is one of the few that turned me down. But usually they'll talk to me. And in this case, Bat did. I went into the prison and spent a couple of hours with him one day.
Well, after Miss Baker was murdered, it seemed like there was a pretty long time frame where nobody was arrested, and I think they ruled about as a suicide. Right?
Well, there was a big mistake made in this case. Here in Texas, if you're in a county without a medical examiner, the justices of the peace, at least it was at that time, perhaps it's changed, I don't know, but the justice of the peace was the one who decided whether or not an autopsy was done. And in Kari's case, the police showed up. There was a note there, and they called the JP and said, I'm at this house. The husband's a Baptist minister, which of course sets a certain tone to the conversation. And there's a suicide note, and his wife's been troubled. They lost a baby, which they did a few years earlier. And what do we do? And the justice of the peace up there did not order an autopsy. What the justice of the peace didn't know was that suicide note was typed and it was unsigned. Yeah, so that made things really hard. So after the family became involved, and actually, if it hadn't been for Kari's family, I don't think that Matt Baker would have ever been charged with the murder. They were the ones who put all the little pieces together and figured out that he wasn't who he pretended to be. They're the one, but he wasn't careful either. I mean, he showed up with the music minister's daughter at a school event for one of the daughters within weeks of Kari's death. So that certainly raised suspicions. But it was really the family that investigated for, I think it was more than a year. They hired private investigators. They hired a lawyer in Waco. If they hadn't done that, I think Matt Baker probably would have gotten away with it.
Well, the private investigators put together kind of their own research, and they were kind of packaging and boarding into the district attorney or to the justice of the peace, and then somebody decided that.
Well, the autopsy was a big problem because it said that, the death certificate said she died from suicide. So it's pretty hard to go in a courtroom and convince a jury that it was a murder when the death certificate says suicide. So they eventually got a court order and had the body exhumed. And this time it came back undetermined. They couldn't say for sure what had happened, but they did find bruising around her nose that made it look as if she perhaps had been suffocated. So, and they were able to do toxicology. It's not as good, a year or two later as it is if it's done right away. Things break down in the body. So, and they, so they were able to get some findings. And once that changed, then the DA's office in Waco in McClellan County started to look into it. They started to take it more seriously.
Well, eventually the case goes to trial.
Yeah.
Were you present during the trial? Were you observing?
I was always, I think of all of my books, there's only one trial I didn't go to. I picked the case up after the trial. But yes, I went to this case. I think it was a 2 or 3 week trial in Waco. And it was a highly emotional trial. In that case, it again happened, like in the Beard case. This time, the music minister's daughter got on the stand and described what Matt Baker had told her, and that Matt had been planning to kill Kari for quite a while, and had even talked about setting it up as a drive-by shooting and other things, and then told the jurors and everybody in the courtroom how Matt described having killed Kari. So her testimony was really kind of the linchpin of the case.
How did you describe Matt's story of how he did it?
She described him as very controlling and not at all the way you would picture a Baptist minister. And she described how he said he had given Kari sleeping pills, and he'd been putting and some alcohol, and then when she was kind of conked out, he put a pillow over her face and suffocated her.
In this case, do you come? Where there are trials, when do you come into a case when you start deciding this?
When do I come into the case?
Yeah, but were you there prior to the criminal charges coming when the family was still doing investigating, or did you come in?
I did the same thing I did at the Beard case and the others. I let the attorneys know I was coming, and I showed up at the trial, and I took really good notes. I always do try to get the transcript if I can. And, I just met a lot of people at the trial and then started going out. I was in Waco probably for 3 or 4 months doing research for the book.
Well, when you show up in the trial, I know the lawyers are aware, but are the family members that are in the gallery with you, do they know who you are and why?
Yeah, I go up and introduce myself, and I've already alerted them through the attorneys that I'm coming. And during the trial, I'll go up and say hello and introduce myself. But I don't ask them any questions. It's too emotional. They don't need me to worry about and bother with while the trial's going on. They're focused on a trial. This is their moment to right a wrong or to defend their loved one if it's accused person's, if it's a defendant's family. But I go up, I introduce myself. The people who are more on the periphery, not the family, I'll walk up, introduce myself, and get phone numbers and contact information from them, because they're usually not as emotionally in as much emotional turmoil. But I stay away from the families initially. I don't think it's a good time to push,
Well, how did the trial end up?
How did that trial end up? He was convicted and given a life sentence.
So once he's convicted, how long do you wait before you ask or anything?
Well, I start working right away. When they go into TDCJ, there's about a 1-month period where you can't go in at all. They can't see anybody. They're adjusting to the prison. They're moved wherever they're going, and they're adjusting to the prison. So after that month's over, I usually write and ask them if they would be willing to talk with me. And then if they say yes, then I have to send paperwork through the media office at TDCJ at the main office, and I request and they bring paperwork down to, in that case, Matt Baker, and Matt has to sign it and agree that he understands why I'm coming, who I am, and that anything he tells me may end up in my book. So once he signs that, then we set a date and I go.
Key question. How do you come up with the names for your books? Do you have help with that, or is it just come?
I usually come up with the names for the books. Usually it's something that stands out. Like in Deadly Little Secrets, there's a song called Dirty Little Secrets that was in the trial. So that's how I came up with that one. She wanted it all. I came up with because Celeste did in fact want it all. Like I said, she cleaned out every husband, and Steve would probably wouldn't have been murdered if she'd been able to get all of his money. But the only way she could get it was, if he was dead. So there's usually something about the case that in Shattered, the David Temple case, I named Shattered. And that was because the glass of the back door was shattered. He came in through and, the way she was killed, there was a shotgun to the back of the head. So usually there's something about the case that stands out that suggests a name for the books.
No testament to the notion that truth is in fact stranger than fiction, though. So Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us. This has been very informative. I also wanted to, you wrote extensively and you've been interviewed about the Texas killing fields involving a string of murders that happened over several years. That is, I believe, a kind of a movie, like a fictional-ish movie, but then also a Netflix 3-part docuseries that's out there on that. But your book is, that's a 30, 40-year kind of run on that one, but I'd recommend that one as well, but we only have so much time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Super Toby.
All right, appreciate it. Like us, follow us, watch us on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Instagram, TikTok, and come see us next week. Thanks for joining us.